This incident happened on a Halloween night. I had finished work early and decided to go for a run. I set out around 4:30 and realized that my usual routes, which crossed many roads, would not be practical. So, I took an alternate route along a canal towpath and some pathways through the woods that I knew would be less busy. Everything was going well, and I was pushing myself steadily. Around 6 km into the route, I reached a long, straight path with a canal on the left side and a wasteland on the right, where some factories used to be, but had mostly been demolished. It had been abandoned for as long as I could remember, overgrown with trees and weeds. There were some bits of an old factory that weren't fully demolished. As I got level with one part of the factory, which still had some old metal fire escape steps attached to it, I noticed a roughly-looking guy sitting on the wall with his legs hanging down. He jumped to his feet as he saw me coming and shouted something, but I couldn't make it out. As I came to level with where he was, I heard him say, "Wait there. Can you help me find my phone?" He said this while he was running down the steps, so I stopped. As I got level with the bottom of the steps, we were standing just a few feet apart, but with a fence between us. It was a really old iron fence with vertical metal bars that had spikes at the top, like you sometimes see around churches and things. He asked me if I would help him find his phone again, saying he had dropped it somewhere nearby, and asked if I could ring his number so he could listen for it. I felt I couldn't exactly refuse as my phone was strapped to my arm. So I said he could tell me the number, and I took my phone off my arm and unlocked it. He blurted out a phone number but said it far too fast, and it didn't begin with 7, which made me start to feel like something wasn't right. Although I was beginning to suspect at this point, I wasn't really worried. I am in pretty good shape, had a big size and weight advantage over him. Plus, there was a fence between us. He didn't seem to be in very good physical shape, and seemed like he might be homeless. I figured if he was trying to mug me for my phone, his only chance would be if he pulled a knife. So, I made sure to stay a good distance away from the fence and kept my eye on where his hands were. I told him I didn't catch any of the numbers because he said it too quickly, and he came out with another number. This time, it did have 7 at the beginning. I entered 7 numbers, and then he started to look around and said, "I can hear it. Come and help me look." As he looked around at the ground, I was about to say that I hadn't even finished dialing when a much larger black guy appeared from behind a section of the wall to my right. He was also really scruffy looking, and from the look of his eyes, it seemed like he was on drugs. He came out saying he could hear the phone ringing over towards him and beckoned me to come through a gap in the fence and help look. The white guy then said, "It is ringing, yeah." I told him it was, even though I still hadn't dialed the last digits, and now I was sure they were trying to lure me to come over to that side of the fence. After 2 or 3 times of them both beckoning me to come and help, always insisting they could hear the ring, I heard the black guy say he's not going to fall for it. He said it in a hushed way, as if he thought I wouldn't hear. But with it being out in the middle of nowhere, I could clearly understand what he said. The white guy then started acting quite aggressive and punched a tree, telling me he needed the phone badly and how his whole life was on the phone, telling me to come and help them look for it while he was punching the tree and ranting. The black guy had taken a few steps away to the right, meaning I couldn't keep my eyes on both of them at the same time. It was after 5:0 p.m. by this point, and it had gotten dark all of a sudden, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. I noticed there was a gap in the fence where some of the bars had been removed right where the black guy was heading, and I decided at that point to get the hell out of there and made a run for it. Neither of them said anything as I ran away, which made me sure that they had malicious intentions. If they genuinely lost their phone and needed help, I would expect them to shout or something to try to get me to come back. But they didn't shout anything. After sprinting for a good 30 seconds, I turned to see if they were chasing me. They were both standing on the path around where the gap in the fence had been, but they were not chasing me. They were standing there watching me run away. I continued running away but kept looking back every few seconds until I was out of sight. It was at this point I got off the canal path and onto the roads. The person I spoke to on the phone to report it took my details and the descriptions, but seemed to think it wasn't anything worth worrying about. However, they said it would be investigated. The whole incident has left me a bit unnerved, and I'm pretty sure I won't be jogging that route alone anytime soon. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This bummed my brother and me out because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating, so that left me home alone with my brother handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10:00, almost all the candy was gone. My brother and I decided that we'd eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch, watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy when there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the heck could be knocking on our door this late. I assumed that it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or that we weren't home. So, I assumed it was my parents being cautious. I looked through the peephole and saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater because he wasn't wearing a costume and was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open the door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to him. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket, and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could muster. "Get the heck away from my house, or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded, and he bared his teeth. His teeth were disgustingly yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't messing around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely off our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. My brother and I were a bit paranoid after this and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man since he hadn't tried to harm us. Now, when I think back to this, I wish we had called the police because maybe we could have prevented a murder. You see, the next day, we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, covered in blood. She'd been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't do much from the information we had given them since we hadn't seen many details of his face. They went on the hunt for the man but never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder because I couldn't have prevented it from happening just by calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all is the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken what he wanted since her door was wide open. This means that he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry. He only had the urge to murder. 2 years ago, my boyfriend, our best friend, and I attended a Halloween party for a college we did not go to. We knew very few people at this party, and at the time of this event, they had all either left or passed out drunk. As most college parties do, people tend to get way too trashed way too early in the night. College kids do not live up to their partying reputation. As this story progresses, understand that everyone in this story is probably way too inebriated for their good. Aside from my boyfriend and me, who drink fairly often, the odd dynamic that probably escalated this situation is that my boyfriend and I don't express PDA, and when I show up with other male friends of mine, people don't necessarily think I have a date at the party. However, I tend to be pretty standoffish to people I don't know, and take pride in my disengaging attitude that I feel prevents creepy encounters. I am not an easy target. This story is about Muhammad, host of this party. We arrived and found him outside, sitting and talking with a girl. As we approached, she left him there. Muhammad tells us he was just rejected by her. We pick him back up and give him the plenty of fish in the sea talk, and try not to let it dampen the party. Muhammad takes this as an invitation, and from that moment, he takes every chance he can to put his arm across my shoulders, getting offended when I brush him off and following us from room to room. Muhammad is trashed before we even start drinking, so we are hyper-focused on his attempts. We were still just trying to party, so every time he followed us, we would delicately leave the room, only for him to tag along not only a few seconds later. Our suspicions are confirmed when we're gathering information on our beloved host. We find the girl who had rejected him earlier. She tells us she had never met him before, and before we had shown up, he had tried to kiss her. She was relieved when we interrupted. Other partygoers, when questioned about his behavior, simply said, "Oh, that's just Muhammad." My boyfriend and I started kissing sloppily as a defense mechanism so that Muhammad would know that I was a lady who was spoken for, and I had my boyfriend watch my back every time I went to the bathroom so I would not be cornered. Muhammad is continuing to drink heavily. My best guy friend leaves with his designated driver and leaves my boyfriend and me there. We are still having a good time but making plans to leave. We intend to drink the place dry before we go, despite our rude host. So, he and I plant ourselves on the couch together with a bottle of whiskey. Muhammad, stage left, is full of beer and can barely make words or stand upright. He points to my bottle. I had hesitated to give it to him for obvious reasons. He gestures again, and I feign ignorance. Muhammad grabs this bottle of whiskey and dumps its remains into his beer hastily. He goes to take a satisfied slurp and spills half the contents into my lap. When he realizes all the attention is on him, he stumbles away. We decide that it is time to leave in the calm of the storm. My boyfriend and I are in the basement alone, laughing and draining the keg set up there before we make our escape. Lo and behold, Muhammad stumbles down, barely coherent but looking for trouble. My boyfriend suggests we just make our way past the stairs and leave like we had been doing all night. Muhammad has other ideas. I step one foot on the stairs, and this drunk guy puts his arm and shoulder across the front of my body to prevent me from leaving. My boyfriend and I have been the most easygoing, non-confrontational people all night, and we have had enough. "Dude, it's time to stop," is all my boyfriend said before Muhammad lunged at him, and they began brawling. Muhammad, being the more physically inhibited one, is not landing any blows, but is too drunk to feel pain. So, it takes a bit of struggle for my boyfriend and me to restrain him on the ground. I yell that he better stay there until we leave. We proceed upstairs to inform his friends, where he is on the first floor of the house. Trying to collect ourselves, Muhammad emerges from the basement, and he is pissed. He is completely incoherent, and no one can talk any sense into him. The scariest part about this was his eyes, completely bloodshot and void of any awareness, almost animal-like. He goes after my boyfriend and catches me in between them, so my boyfriend and I are trying desperately to fend him off together, while all the sleepy drunks are waking up from the screaming. He finally subsides, and we fly out the door into the street, leaving the door wide open behind us. The weirdest part is that as we left, the other partygoers were yelling, "Dude, what are you doing?" Muhammad says, "I love her." The partygoers remind him, "You don't know her." So Muhammad, for your own sake, I hope we never meet again.